Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 54, The Dynamics of Awareness, with our guest via Skype, Deborah Blake. Hey, Deborah, welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Excellent. So for members of my audience who don't know who you are, could you introduce yourself and talk about a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, I can't believe anyone doesn't know who I am. My name is Deborah Blake, and I am an author, among other things. I've written 9 books for Llewellyn, primarily on modern witchcraft. My most recent book is Everyday Witchcraft, Making Time for Spirit in a Too Busy World, and it's actually sort of the follow-up to another book. I also have 2 novels out with Berkley. Shockingly, they have witches in them too. They're actually based quite loosely, of course, on they're sort of updated versions of the Russian Baba Yaga fairy tales. So they have an unusual witch in them, witches, because there's more than one. And I just finished the 3rd one in that series and sent it to my editor, and I'm working on the 4th one. And when I'm not doing those things, I run a small artist cooperative shop in upstate New York, and make jewelry that I sell at the shop, and do things on the side like tarot readings and energy healing, and occasionally something else if I have time, which I mostly don't.
Excellent. So why don't you talk a little bit about your most recent book? Because I know a lot of people have a really hard time finding space for practice in a busy world. Well, and I can include myself in that.
Oh, yeah, and me too. I mean, I do find it a tad ironic that, I'm so busy spending my time writing books about, how people can practice, that I have to remind myself that I'm supposed to be practicing too. But yeah, my 3rd book for Llewellyn was called The Goddesses in the Details. And that is far and away my most popular book. It's the one I get the most letters and emails about, and people say it, changed my life, which I don't know if it does that, but it apparently has an impact. And that one also was about, integrating your spiritual life as a pagan, whatever flavor of pagan you are, with your day-to-day life as a human being, whatever flavor of human being you are. And initially, I sort of thought I had said everything that I had to say. And then it occurred to me relatively recently that in the many years it had been, I think that book came out in 2010, something like that my practice had changed, my attitudes towards some things had changed, and I'd also learned a few more things. And because one of the things that people still complained to me the most about was I don't have time to let spirit into my life. How on earth do I do that? I have screaming children. My husband wants dinner on the table. I have this job that, whatever. So what I did is I wrote this book, Everyday Witchcraft, which is basically a whole lot of suggestions and inspiration, hopefully, for ways to, walk your talk every day. My focus, I guess, as a writer is on everyday witchcraft. It's, I love the holidays, don't get me wrong. I love the full moons and, all of that. But those things, while a great part of witchcraft, are not, to me, the main part. To me, the main part is how you walk your talk, how you live your life. And, spirit is, at least for me, a part of how you make the decisions of how you live your life. No matter which form spirit comes to you in, and, I think this is true of every religion, you make a lot of your day-to-day decisions based on what it is you believe spiritually, should you have that kind of belief. And so everyday witchcraft, I'm just trying to make it easier, faster, simpler, so that, we can all manage it in the crazy, crazy world we live in.
Mm-hmm. And, I know for myself, and it's interesting because I'm reminded of another person who on Facebook who brought that question up. It's like, do you have to have a daily practice to be a quote unquote real witch, And, and it sounds to me like it's more from what you're you're describing and what I think is like, it's in those small things, like doing the dishes can be a magical act, right?
Oh, absolutely. My hot chocolate every morning is a magical act.
Right.
I actually take a bunch of ingredients and I put them together and do what I like to call kitchen alchemy, because I'm mindful of the things that I'm putting in. And so I put in a little cinnamon for prosperity and love, and I put in a little hot pepper for energy and creativity. And it's something I do every single morning. It's not a big deal. It's not something I wouldn't be doing anyway. I'm just doing it in a mindful fashion with intent. And that's the thing that makes it not just a mundane act, but a spiritual act. And I do think that if you don't have time, and most of us do not have much spare time, you need to find ways to take those mundane acts that you're going to do anyway, like take a shower. So you're going to go take a shower. Visualize cleansing energy, washing away the crap, little stuff like that doesn't take any extra time, doesn't take any extra energy. All it takes is for you to, for 5 minutes, stop thinking about your bills or, whatever it is you're thinking about, and think about spirit. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that, to me, makes it a daily practice. It's less a matter. I have a few things that I consider to be truly spiritual that I do daily, like greeting the gods in the morning and saying thank you at night. But all the stuff in between, the fact that I recycle is a spiritual practice to me, because it is part of how, I walk on the earth. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm a really practical witch. I'm not, I love reading the esoteric books, and I find many of them inspiring. They don't have a lot to do with my practice of witchcraft, except sometimes to spark something in my brain that goes, oh, that's cool. Mm-hmm. But yeah, my witchcraft practice is, I'm a Taurus, so it's pretty much a rock. That's my practice, is like piling a bunch of rocks on top of each other until I have a wall that will stand up to the world.
Yeah, I totally get that. And, for me, it's always been an interesting thing to think about daily practice, because there's a part of my brain that, is kind of stuck in that mode where it's like, you must do some sort of like esoteric thing every day because that's what I should properly do, la, 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 la.
A real witch, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Yeah, and I have the same thing. It's taken me a long time to get away from that little voice in my head that says, you should be doing it this way.
Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to kind of get out of that mindset. I've come to a point where I've accepted that, what I do as a witch, I don't have a daily practice like, some of my other coven mates, right. But I do have a practice, and, it's a little more random, but, it's there.
Well, the way I look at it is, when I was trying really hard to do a concrete daily spiritual practice, what would happen is I'd miss a day. I'd feel guilty. It wouldn't get done. I'd feel more guilty. And then I ended up not accomplishing anything and feeling bad about that. Whereas by integrating it in with my daily life, and of course I do occasionally do something extra, something that's really focused, the full moon stuff, the getting the gang over the Sabbats. But by having it in my everyday life, not only do I get rid of the guilt, I'm actually doing it. It's one of the things that made a difference for me. I read this wonderful book called, yes, of course it is, Diane Sylvan, The Circle Within. I love this book. Mm-hmm. And when I read it, it changed my life. In fact, my whole coven read it together because it had so much influence on me. And it's a small book, thankfully. Mm-hmm. But, we basically, because one of the things she talks about is a daily practice. And what I liked about what she said was that it doesn't have to be a formal stand in front of an altar with a candle, say a prayer kind of thing. If that works for you, that's great. But the trick is to find the thing that works in your life for your style. And that's what I talk about in Everyday Witchcraft is, don't let anybody tell you this is the way to do it. Goodness knows we're all a bunch of different witches. Mm. Your way of doing things is different than my way of doing things anyway. But the trick is we go in with this mindset that says there's a right way and a wrong way. And there isn't. You find the way that works for you. And if it works for you, then it's the right way. I mean, unless you're, sacrificing babies under the moonlight, which I don't recommend. It's very messy.
Yeah, you get blood on the clothes. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And, it's not like I don't do special things for special occasions. Like there was one Samhain where for the month leading up to Samhain, because I was doing a very important Samhain for a few people that required a little extra spiritual oomph to do and a little extra spiritual grounding to do. So, for the 30 days leading up to it, I had a very specific practice that I was doing, and it really helped for the ritual that I was doing, because, I don't think I would have gotten through it without having that extra foundation.
Oh, and there are definitely times when life requires something different and more. But for most of us, that doesn't come along a lot. It's just, if you're in the middle of a crisis, you need to double down and do some bigger work. Or if you're trying to help somebody else or whatever. But yeah, for walking your talk day to day, nothing beats looking at what you're doing already and figuring out ways to make it more meaningful instead of trying to add in extra things when you didn't have time or energy for the stuff you already had on your plate, which is most of us.
Yeah, and I think an interesting thing too, and from my seminary education and actually being in religious community, like visiting and working with some religious communities, that's kind of the whole idea behind monastic life. It's not necessarily the praying 5 times a day or whatever in religious community, but it's also mindfully doing the work of community.
Right, tending the bees and planting the seeds and all of that. And ironically, and maybe this is why I ended up being the kind of witch I am, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a monk. That life really appealed to me. And then you get to, do the nice handwork. And then I found out that A, I was the wrong sex, and B, I was the wrong religion because I was Jewish. So apparently not a lot of female Jewish monks out there. Woo-hoo. And so, then I had to find a different path. But I suppose in my own way, I am, a modern day monk. Sadly, I don't want to be a monk, but that same idea that your whole life is sacred work. That whatever it is you're doing, whether it's taking out the garbage or consoling a friend whose heart is broken, all of those things are doing the work of the gods. If you are mindful of it.
Right. Why do you think people get so stuck on the proper way to do things?
Well, I think some of it is, our culture. We are taught in school, color within the lines. You must spell everything correctly. My editor is really funny about that. Correct spelling. I don't know. So some of it's that. Some of it, I think, is the human desire for order. I think that illusion of order and control makes us feel better about things because then they don't feel so out of control. Like I said, Taurus, I'm what I like to call a reformed control freak, and what the people who work with me would probably call a partially reformed control freak. And I'm at the point in my life where I am fully aware that control is an illusion. And yet I'm still trying to say this is the right way to do things and the wrong way to do things on stuff that doesn't really matter. I mean, it's one thing to do it, yes, you should probably drive on the right lane of the road, for instance. Some of those rules do, there's a reason for them. But, there are a lot of things that don't matter, and yet we get very caught up in them because that makes us, I think, feel safe and rooted. Except the problem is that being safe and rooted often doesn't give you the opportunity to grow and blossom. And so you have to find a balance between those two things.
Well, yeah, because you need to be I mean, being rooted is one thing, but you need to be flexible enough to be able to change. And that's where you start getting into problems, because then you've got people who are very adamant about this is the proper way to be a witch or be a person of whatever religious persuasion.
Right.
And
or a woman or a
queer person or
whatever.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
A Democrat. Yeah.
Right.
And then of course you've got the other extreme, which we do see in witchcraft as well, which is the people who are so determined not to be tied down by rules that they then just flit all over the place and in fact don't accomplish anything.
Yeah.
It's all about the balance. Everything in life really is about the balance, but certainly I think that holds true for a witchcraft practice too.
Right.
A spiritual practice of any kind, that balance between being rooted and grounded and also flexible enough to go with the flow. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have 4 elements and not just one.
Right. And, and I know some people, who are, pretty flighty and, are very fey in that way. And, they're off in the clouds, but,
mm-hmm.
They have enough of a tether to some discipline that they can work with that and not, blow things up.
Oh, and to some extent, that if that's the person you are, it's like me being uber grounded, there's I can change that to some extent. To some extent, it is simply, the person I was born and will probably die being.
Right.
And luckily there's enough of us around that we also balance each other out, mm-hmm. which is good. That's one of those things. If the flighty people don't drive you crazy. And I think sometimes it's really good for us to purposely seek out the people who are not like us, mm-hmm. because otherwise your point of view is the only one you ever see, and that gets kind of murky too. Whereas if you've got somebody who's shaking things up a little bit, even though your initial reaction may be to say, oh my God, what are they thinking? Sometimes it's good to go, oh, all right, I can see some benefit in doing things that way instead. In my circle, I have Blue Moon Circle. We've been practicing together for 10 years, I guess, 10 years and a smidge. And we've got, the few people that started out with, and then some folks who've been with us for quite a while, and people come and go. But mm-hmm. essentially what I do is I lead most of the rituals. I'm, the high priestess. Nobody else wants to be the high priestess. But periodically I say, hey, Tag, you're it. Mm-hmm. Let's let somebody else lead a ritual, in part so that I get to practice and not lead, but in part because it gets boring just hearing my voice all the time. And sometimes it's good to, see what somebody else is going to do, even if it isn't what I would do.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do the same thing. It's like, hey, why don't you cast the circle today? Okay, great. And, and I also get what you mean about, finding people that have complementary gifts to yours, because that's kind of the way my wife and I work a lot, because there's a lot of like, I tend to think of it as like, I'm more water and earth and she's more fire and air. Mm-hmm. And, and when we work together, it works out really well. And, and we've, since found a lot of other people to work with in our coven that,
right.
Complement our gifts and our work as well.
Yeah, we have very different personalities in our group. Yeah. I mean, we did figure out some time ago through trial and error, the way you do, that we in fact didn't want, because we're mostly sort of a middle-aged group, that we didn't want to be a teaching coven. We have one member who's younger, and she's on a very different path than the rest of us, and that's fine. But she also does the study. She does the work. We didn't want to be having to start over every single time and lead people by the hand. And we also discovered that we don't do well as a larger group. I think we got as big as, say, 9 or 10 at some point. And it was really too much for us. We have rituals that are bigger than that because people bring their significant others if they're pagan friendly, or, friends who are interested, that sort of thing. But in general, we've discovered that we function really well as a fairly small group, 5, 6. We started as 3. The first year or so we were in existence, there were literally only 3 of us, which is how we got the name Blue Moon Circle, because if one of you can't come, you just don't bother to do it. So we only met every once in a blue moon.
Nice.
So, but yeah, I do love the mix of different people, even though sometimes it can be frustrating because communication between people is just hard.
Yeah. Well, that's why we utilize our email list quite a bit, thankfully. Mm-hmm. And even then, sometimes it can be a little hairy, but we usually make it work in the end.
Well, and I think if everybody's willing to work with it, then that's the best way. Yeah, it's really good. And one of the ironies for me in my practice, I am essentially a solitary person by nature. I work in a place where, although I see people come in and go, it's not like a big, busy place. Mm-hmm. When I come home, I'm sitting in the corner and I'm writing, or I make jewelry. I live by myself. Almost all of the things that I do in my life are solitary, except my witchcraft. And in witchcraft, apparently, I am a group witch. It was a very bizarre thing for me to discover early on in my introduction to witchcraft that, while I do things on my own, of course I do, but I am really happiest being part of a group of witches. And when I'm not, I miss it terribly. Mm-hmm. And it's not something I can explain, since every other part of my life is pretty solitary, but it's, my group is like an extended family, and I can't imagine my life without them. Yeah.
Are we like spiritual twins separated at birth? Because I'm kind of like that too. And,
we might be,
because, I'm an introvert for the most part. And, and I do a lot of things by myself, do my work by myself,
right.
I do the podcasting and all that editing stuff. And, and I'm married, so I'm not like always alone, but with I prefer doing work in groups, and it's more, and it's not just for doing magic in group, because there's nothing quite like doing magic in a group.
Right.
But it's also, having that community, because I get community on my own terms.
Right. And the community part of it is so valuable to me. My family doesn't live where I live. Mm-hmm. And I have some good friends here, many of whom happen to be part of my pagan community, although not all of them. But yeah, that sisterhood is, it grounds something in my life that I don't get anywhere else. And of course, I do love the energy that's generated by group work. As long as you've got a group that works well together. I've been in circles where you get no energy at all, because there's 3 people in the corner chit-chatting about God knows what, or somebody comes drunk or some other thing.
Oh, the bad coven story, yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, everybody's got them.
At least one.
When it works, it's wonderful.
Yes.
When it works, and I think it's one of those things that even when we struggle to find time to come together, once we get together in circle, everybody goes, oh, it's so good to be here. And that is something that I don't really get replicated any other place in my life. I go to writing conferences, and that's sort of the closest second thing. I love being in a room full of writers, but it's still, it's not that same level of intimacy that you get with your group that practices spiritually with you all the time.
Well, I mean, I think it's because, magic is such an intimate thing, because
absolutely.
It's really difficult to, you can't really, well, the way I usually put it to my students is like, you just can't lie in circle, because you're
love and perfect trust.
Right. Because you're opening yourself up spiritually, emotionally, magically, and, it's all going to be there.
Right. Yeah, you are your truest self in circle, and people mostly accept that. You may leave the circle and somebody will go, I can't believe you're doing that with your life. In circle, if it's going right, you don't get that. You get people going, how can we help you to make things better if they're not working for you? But there isn't that sort of critical thinking that you get outside the circle. What you get is, here you are, here we are, all together, and this is a good thing. And yeah, that's priceless. I mean, that really is a real gift.
But I can also see why someone would not want to be in that type of situation too.
I definitely understand why people would be solitaries. For one thing, not everybody can find a group or find the right group. The two women who started Blue Moon Circle with me had both been solitaries for their whole lives, really. You know, one of them was raised as a hereditary witch by, her grandmother, who was a gypsy, and the other one had been practicing on her own for 10, 15 years. And neither of them had ever been in a group because they'd never seen a group that appealed to them. And in fact, when I first said, I'm starting my own group, do you want to come? They both sort of gave me the oogly eye and went, and then they came and it worked and it was wonderful. But, there are so many reasons why people are solitaries, including the fact that may just be the way they're built, sort of like you and I are solitary in other endeavors, and would not do well working in an office with 50 people in cubicles.
Right.
That's
tried that, didn't work.
yeah. And also not so good at taking orders from other people. I never would have made it in the army. But it's also true, I think, that for many people, there's no group. There's so many of us are in a place where there isn't a community. I live in a small town in upstate New York, and the couple of people who had been sort of in charge of establishing community and holding community together, one of them is long gone. The other one, who was my original teacher, finally moved outside of town and said, I've done this for 20 years. I don't want to do study groups anymore. And I've thought about it, but my God, I'm so overloaded that, somebody else is going to have to come along and be the right person to do that. But I get people who come up to me all the time in the shop where I work because they, I'm pretty much as out of the broom closet as you can be. I have books everywhere.
Right.
And they say, well, where can we find a coven? And I have to say to them, I don't know. I'm so sorry. Mm-hmm. My group is mostly closed. Occasionally, if somebody comes along who expresses interest, who, we think will fit with all of the established folks, we'll let them come and try it out. But almost everybody who asks me, I can already tell that they are not going to be a good fit for our little family. And, it's not that there aren't witches here. There are lots of witches here. And there probably are a couple of small covens who keep, a low profile and also don't particularly advertise because they don't want to add anybody else in. And in Binghamton, which is about an hour from me, there are huge covens. There are lots of them. They do big open community things. They're open in that as long as somebody in the community invites you and brings you sort of under their wing, you can go. They're not, you can just stroll in without an invitation kind of thing. Right. But, you can get into them. And so sometimes I have to say to people, I'm sorry, but you're probably going to have to go as far away as Binghamton or start your own, go for it. But yeah, I think both paths are very viable. I did 5.5 years with my first coven, did my year and a day of training with that coven through my high priestess. And then things sort of imploded and I needed to leave. And I had about 9 months of practicing as a solitary before I finally got the message that it was time to start my own group. You know how that works. Right. And it wasn't that I didn't like the 9 months. The 9 months were fine. But boy, did I miss having that circle. I missed having that group. So it was very nice to be able to go back to that communion of spirit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, same here. And, it took me a lot longer, actually, because, my first coven ended quite badly with a lot of drama and angst and money issues, and it was not pretty. And, it took me several years before I could feel comfortable even just being in the pagan community because, he was quite public. Mm-hmm. The person that ran my old coven was rather public for a long time and then just kind of disappeared. So it was really hard. And now it's kind of strange because, I'm getting kind of known and it feels kind of weird.
I understand. I'm always sort of amazed when somebody says, "You're Deborah Blake, you write those books." I'm like, you know who I am? Really? Because to me, I'm just, the girl who sits in the corner of the living room with a bunch of cats and writes the books. And every once in a while, somebody meets me and they're they're impressed. Like, really? Who did you think you were talking to? Because I'm just the girl in the corner with the, the laptop. Yep, but it is a little strange when you become known and you're out in the public eye and people don't perceive you as this individual. They perceive you as whatever the persona you project, which is part of the deal. And it's not a bad thing. It's just a little odd. And it's sort of interesting. It does remind me that all the folks that I look at it and go, oh, look, there's Christopher Penzak. He's just a guy who puts on his pants, one leg at a time. Although, I don't know, Christopher's pretty impressive. He might actually be able to jump up in the air and magically take the pants, But most of them are pretty much your average person.
Yeah, and it's a very humbling thing because you realize, oh yeah, I don't have to go gaga, even though I'm kind of nervous about talking to them. You know what I mean? It was just like when I interviewed Janet Farrar and Gavin Bone a few months ago, right before Pecan, and man, I was so nervous. I was so excited, but they were just so lovely and so friendly and so beautiful. And it was just an amazing discussion, an amazing conversation.
Yeah. I remember the first time I met Raven Grimassi and his wife, Stephanie. And, I just thought they were the coolest people ever. And they were so sweet. They were really lovely. We were at the New York Witch Festival, which was out on Long Island. And Stephanie and I ended up talking about hot flashes. I mean, it was just, it was one of those things where, just regular people, shouting over the too loud music. And I have to say, with very few exceptions, the famous pagans I've met are lovely. Selena Fox, oh my God. I don't know if you've had a chance to talk to her. She's a sweetheart. You should talk to her. She's lovely. I mean, really, really nice. See, Budapest, quirky, but also very sweet. Really just, I mean, she's a little prickly edged perhaps, but that's I mean, if you read her books, you can tell that's just her. Very, very lovely. And that's actually been one of the real pleasures of being a pagan author is I get to meet all these other pagan authors. Sort of like your job now.
Right. And, I guess the one thing that I take from that is that, we are all human and, and I, and you write books, I do this podcast, other people write books, other people do classes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, you take what you need from all of this and you do what works for you. And I think that's where people get really hung up on stuff. Right. And people kind of get hard up about stuff. Because, we all have our extremists in the religion, and it doesn't matter what religion you are. And, I know quite a few extremists in the pagan world. And, when I say that, people freak out. People are like, no, we're pagans, la la. It's like,
we have to pretend everybody's wonderful and we're all in this state. And, for the most part, most people are wonderful. Yeah. There are people on either end of the spectrum. You do have the fluffy bunnies, the people who are so caught up in the external part of it that they're not getting the deep spiritual practice. And then you get the people who are so hardcore that they've forgotten we're not supposed to be telling each other what the right way and the wrong way is. Fluffy bunny or no. But for the most part, they really are lovely people. And my favorite thing is when people ask me, often in interviews, in fact, I just got a list of questions through my publisher. Somebody's doing an article and they said, well, what's a witch? I'm like, well, how long do you have?
Yeah.
It's like, well, and they said, well, what's the difference between, a pagan, a witch, and a Wiccan? And I went, how long do you have? Because it's not, there are very few simple answers because we are such an eclectic bunch. But that's one of the things I love about them. And that's, and really that's true of other religions too. It's just that in our religion, we kind of take it to extremes.
Yeah.
But, I think that's one of our positive factors. There are plenty of people who are practicing in a way that I wouldn't want to do necessarily, and maybe even doing things I don't agree with. But I'm not going to tell them not to. That's between them and their goddess. It's, to me, I just want to practice my own spiritual belief freely. I want pagans in general to be able to practice their own spiritual beliefs freely. Mm-hmm. And I don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's been interesting because I've seen a lot of, since the ruling came down about gay marriage, there's been a lot of blowback where like, we're a Christian nation, we're this, we're that. And it's like,
they're going to ruin the whole world. It's like, no, really? Look away. You don't want to see it. Just look someplace else.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've never understood all of these people who get so upset about what somebody else is doing.
Yeah.
Legalize marijuana. You don't want to smoke it? Don't smoke it. You're okay then. You don't want your kids to smoke it? Well, they were probably going to smoke it anyway, and maybe you should talk to them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's the same thing about the gay marriage thing. I really am, my mind is boggled by the fact that so many people think this is the end of the world as they know it. And maybe it is, and maybe that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. That world wasn't so swell.
Right.
It was pretty crap for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And now love wins and everybody gets to, have the same thing. And, if you look back at your history books, there was a time not that long ago, women couldn't vote. Mm-hmm. And, black people were slaves and all the rest of it. And as each of those things changed, there were a whole lot of people saying, oh my God, it's the end of the world. Now women can vote, those foolish hussies. How will they know what to do if we don't tell them? And yet we seem to have survived it. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure that not only will we survive this, but, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, everybody will be going, what did they make a fuss about?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Are you kidding? There was a time when gay people couldn't get married?
Right.
You mean there was a time when, you couldn't live in a triad and be, out on the street and people would, it's
right.
It's just one of those things. Again, it's that people trying to have the illusion of control because it makes them feel safe. And I can understand that, and I can accept that while not accepting their viewpoint as influencing my life in any way.
Yeah, and I think the pagan community is no exception these days.
Oh, true.
Because
absolutely.
there's a lot of changes coming in the pagan community, and there's a lot of differences too. Because you're talking about stuff happening in New York, and actually I went to school in New York, but we could talk about that later. But, there's a huge difference between West Coast paganism and East Coast paganism. And there's a lot of change.
Country paganism.
Right. And there's a lot of, these days, there's a lot more talk about theology in paganism. There's a lot more talk, where, not even like 10 years ago, it was more of like, we're pagans. We need to make sure we have these things sorted. And now we're discussing the issues of every other religion.
Right.
We're discussing issues of theology. We're discussing issues of racism. We're discussing issues of multi-faith, and there's going to be clashes, and there are clashes.
You were talking about being at PantheaCon. We were there at the same time, although sadly we did not get to meet up.
Right.
And, the last couple of years, each year there has been a fuss, a kerfuffle, because people got offended. Somebody said or did something that some other people found offensive. I wasn't involved in any of them. I don't know a lot of what happened. I'm not coming down on the side of anyone. Mm-hmm. But that is part of the growing pains of a religion that is really only just starting to find its feet.
Right.
And, I think we need to remember to be kind to each other as we're going through this process. And, I say, and people often disagree with me. That's okay. People are allowed to disagree with me. I believe that no matter how different we are from each other, we still have much more in common with each other than we usually do with folks who are not pagans. Mm-hmm. I say that, and there's always somebody who has to go, no, that's not true. I'm a, blah, 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 and you're a blah, blah, blah. But I still think that in general, we really do view things, we view the universe much more the same than we do not the same. And we got to have each other's backs. There are still way too many people who don't like us just because we're us. And if we're busy fighting with each other, those people win.
Yeah. But we also have to remember that, we do need to challenge each other on topics, because I'll admit, it was our coven that started the gender issue stuff. And
but it had merit. I mean,
yeah,
from what
absolutely,
I understand.
absolutely. And my wife wrote a really powerful essay, to really break open that. But the one thing that we were very adamant about as a coven, because we like to practice radical inclusion, is that we didn't want to demonize people in this discussion.
Right.
We were just trying to open the wound and get it started. And
and I think that's important. It's that whole idea of communication again. Communication is hard, but you can't get anywhere without it. If you are not talking to each other, nothing is going to get solved.
Right. And it's not like we didn't run up against brick walls on either side either. There was more yelling at each other than talking. But what's been really interesting, we've stepped back quite a bit because there are a lot of other people that really took up the ball and really did a lot of really soulful work, especially, I like to give props to Kaya Coven out here and Yesha Rabbit, because, they really took up the ball of inclusion for transgendered women specifically, and really just did some amazing work. And it's been really great to see that happen where, people are just really stepping up and getting it done. And
which is wonderful. I mean, that I find that so encouraging.
Yeah.
It's often baby steps and you take 2 steps forward and then 1 step back. But the fact that every time the discussion happens, you get more and more people who are saying, how can I help? How do we have this conversation in a reasoned way? It's what got us to where we were, with the gay marriage thing. Right. The discussion happened, and everybody thought, we're making tiny little steps. We're not really making a lot of progress. And then one morning we woke up. And boom. And there was progress all over the place. And, Facebook blew up and Twitter blew up. And it was such a wonderful moment. But literally 2 weeks before that moment, you couldn't say that moment was going to happen. So you just have to keep working at it until you get there. And even when you're there, you're not there. I mean, the fight will continue, but
absolutely. And it's evolved into other fights that really need, not fights, I want to say, but other work that needed to happen. Yeah. Especially around race, we're really supportive of we know a lot of the folks that are doing a lot of work around racism and paganism. And, it's a discussion that needs to happen if we're going to evolve as a community, as a umbrella of religion, I should say.
Well, and it's true in other communities too. For instance, the novels I write are called, considered to be paranormal romance, and I rub shoulders with a lot of folks who are, fantasy science fiction writers, and they have big conventions as well. In the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years, they've had some serious discussions and issues about, the inclusion of, there are very few people of color involved, and everybody's sort of trying to figure out, why that is. Are they made to feel unwelcome? Do they not feel like they belong for some reason that is internal to them? We don't know. And then there's the whole issue of women's safety, and that's a huge one at those cons. And I have a writer friend of mine, Jim C. Hines, is a real activist. He's wonderful. And he has been pushing and stepping on a lot of toes in the process to not only, make some changes, but also to make sure that the conversation stays active, and I respect that so much. And it is really interesting being in these 2 different communities to see much of the same conversation happening. And to me, what that says is we've got sort of this dynamic of awareness starting to happen across the culture, whether it's with pagans or writers or, just the general society. And yeah, often you turn on the news and it's horribly depressing and you think,
Right.
oh, we're going backwards.
Or, looking at Facebook.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But then you look at these smaller, quieter conversations. And I think, at least for me, I take hope from that to know that the good people are still having the conversation, even though there's a lot of yelling from very loud other people. We're not mentioning any names, guy with a weird hairdo.
Right.
But, just because our voices aren't the loudest doesn't mean they aren't going to have influence.
Right. And I think actually that ties into, spiritual practice, daily practice, because a lot of this activism for a lot of people is part of their daily practice. And, for me, I always stress too with people when we talk about, activism is that it is the little things that gets the job done. It's just being a supportive presence. It's making cookies for the people that are walking out in the streets, making dinner or whatever. It's just keeping a space open for these discussions to happen. And, and
sometimes just listening when people are upset. Exactly. That was one of the things that happened with me was I had somebody who came to me right at the end of the con, and it wasn't related to this exactly. There was something else that happened, but all I did was provide a safe place to listen to so that he felt like he was heard by somebody. And that was all he needed. He didn't expect me to solve the problem. He didn't expect things to change. He just needed somebody to hear him. And I think in our community, we have so many voices talking at once sometimes,
right,
that people don't feel like their voices are heard. We need a big giant talking stick to, pass around so that everybody gets a turn to be heard. And I think you're absolutely right. Part of, the question that I ask myself and my readers is, are you walking your talk? And if you're not, if you feel like there's something missing from that, how can you start walking your talk better? What do you believe and how are you manifesting that belief in your daily life? And for me as a high priestess, that often means being the person people can talk to without judgment.
Right.
Doesn't mean I have to agree with them. It doesn't mean that I can solve their problems. It just means that when they need somebody to really listen, I can do that.
Right. And
it's not always convenient.
No. Oh no. And it's hard sometimes, especially if something's really going down, it's like, you might have an opinion about what's going down but then, you have to maintain that
right
non-judgmental thing and then say, okay, here's what's going on. Here's what I understand is going on. Here's some ways we can work with this. And I will walk with you through this, but you got to know that I'm not happy with what you're doing or, I'm fully supporting what you're doing, that kind of thing.
Right. Yep. And that's definitely true. And I think that, in essence, some of it is listening isn't accepting. You don't have to agree. You don't have, and you can offer your own opinion sometimes, but when you do that, you need to do it in such a way that you're saying, okay, this is how I perceive this situation. I see that you perceive it in a slightly different way, and I'm not saying the way I'm perceiving it is more right than your way, but from where I sit, I'm thinking that perhaps instead of being angry, you could, try and see the other person's point of view or whatever the situation is. And that's often it. And I do, that's part of how I walk my talk is I try and see everybody's point of view. I don't have to agree with them, but I try to put myself in their shoes. My former brother-in-law, who is actually a good friend of mine, is a born-again Christian and a Tea Party guy, and we could not be more diametrically opposed in our, general beliefs about, how things should be done. That doesn't change the fact that he's a good guy and, he steps up to do things for other people. We basically sort of accept that the other one has a really funky religion, and agree to disagree. And there are certain things we don't talk about, like politics, because I have to kill and bury him in the backyard. But I also, look at him as a human being and say, okay, I understand where he's coming from. I absolutely diametrically disagree with him, but I'm not going to demonize him. I'm not going to say he's a horrible person because he doesn't happen to agree with me. My God, if I demonized everybody who didn't agree with me, I'd be in a very small room by myself.
Right. Well, and I think it's being honest about who you are and what you do. If you, like, for us, I try to be an embodiment of inclusion because that's what I believe. I believe in radical inclusion, and I try to mean that for everybody. And there are some days where I utterly fail.
Oh yeah, and me too. I try and be radically inclusive as well. For me, I try to accept everyone, as who they see themselves as. That doesn't mean I have to stay in the same room with them. That doesn't mean I have to like them. That doesn't mean I have to agree with them. But I do try and give them, feel like they have the right to be who they are, as wackadoodle as that baby.
Right.
And I don't, one of the things I love about paganism, as opposed to many other religions, a number of which I tried out along the way, is that for most of us, it is not a matter of our way is right and your way is completely wrong. Which, the Christians, the Jews, Muslims, they all pretty much have that rule that, this is the one way you do it. And if not, you go to hell, or, bad shit happens, or, you're not one of the chosen people, whatever. And sometimes, that stuff happens just because you're a woman or because you somehow don't fall within the roles that the religion has. And pagans, for the most part, are more inclusive. They don't care what kind of sex you have, or, how you practice, naked, not naked, that kind of thing. And so I try and manifest that too. That's because it's the thing about this path that I cherish so much. I try and do it. And like you said, I sometimes fail. There are people I can't do it. There are certainly, situations in which I have to just walk away.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a difference between being inclusive and having good boundaries.
Right. That is true. And allowing negativity and crap to, harsh your bows, or whatever. I think one of the things that we learn as we go further along this path is that there are people whose energy is not good for our energy.
Yeah.
And that you need to avoid them if you can.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think is a thing that a lot of people really kind of can't wrap their heads around is that that's okay. It is okay to have difference. It is okay for people to be different from each other. It's not a bad thing.
It's actually kind of a good thing. What if there were only one color? I love the color black. It's my favorite color, but what if that were the only color? Well, first of all, you wouldn't be able to see anything in the room.
Right.
For another thing, it'd be really boring. I think that having all of these different colors of pagans is part of what makes us great. It's part of what makes it's like having more than one sex. That's kind of cool too. But, and more than one style of doing things, you're way more likely to find the people who fit you if there are a bunch to choose from. So why would you want to make everybody fit into this little tiny box just because that box is your comfort zone?
Right. And that's how our evolution is too. I mean, we're with the internet, with the way our society is moving, it's becoming that diverse, and it's becoming much more of a mix of people and ideas and practices. And, people just, there's some people that seem to be fighting it tooth and nail. And it's like, we have to evolve this way. Right. We'll kill each other otherwise,
Well, and one of the things that I try to do with my books, and in particular with Everyday Witchcraft, is I try to write this particular book in such a way that it would be useful to everybody, no matter which path they walked. There are places where I say, well, this might not work for you. If you're a Wiccan, this may be more appropriate. But, I have people who are not pagans at all, who are taking the basic ideas of, making time for spirit And, a lot of the things that I talk about in the book are not, some of them are magical, some of them are not magical. Many of them are simply spiritual, and they do really apply across a pretty wide range. And I did that on purpose. That was one of the things that was different from when I wrote the first book on this general theme. That one was probably more Wiccan in slant, because that was the way I was taught. And I'm probably more easing towards the general witch, although much of my practice is still pretty standard. I use a green candle in the north, that kind of stuff, because I like it. But I did really try and concentrate on being inclusionary, also with gender issues. I tried not to say, this particular kind of couple, or in this particular, I wanted it to be accessible for everyone. I didn't want anybody to feel left out. In fact, I've been having a grand time. I'm working on a tarot deck for Llewellyn, and I'm really lucky. I have a terrific illustrator that I'm working with named Elizabeth Alba, and we're having a blast with this. I don't know if you've seen any of the pictures on Facebook. You'll have to go look at my timeline. There's a few of them. But one of the things when I started working on this, and Elizabeth and I started talking about what the illustrations were going to look like, it's kind of a fun deck. They came to me and they said, well, you did this witchcraft, the Witch's Broom book, which had a very cool cover with, a black cat and the traditional sort of witch's hat and a broom. Right. And they said, well, what would you think about doing a tarot deck that's sort of a retro witch kind of thing, which is lighthearted but also serious. They came to me because that's what I do. I do things that are both serious but also, not taking myself too seriously, right? and keeping the humor in things. And I said, and then I said yes. But one of the things that I asked the illustrator to do was to have some of the illustrations. Obviously there's a lot of female witches in black pointy hats, and there are some male figures that are truly male. But we also, on purpose, put in gender neutral pictures that people could look at it and say, that's me, no matter what. And, that was something I really, really wanted to do, because there aren't a lot of tarot decks out there that have that. Right. And because I am trying to be, as you said, more mindful of being inclusionary, it's a little tricky for me, because I'm in some ways kind of white bread. I have a vast array of experiences and friends from all walks of everything, and I certainly have family members who are gay and iffy, people who haven't quite figured out what they are yet, and friends who are. But my own personal experience is pretty boring and mundane. And so I've been really working on trying to be more mindful of the fact that the way I look at the world is not the way that everybody else looks at the world. And hopefully, both with this book and with the upcoming tarot deck, people will feel more like I've made space for them. I hope so. That was my goal.
Well, and I think the big point here too is that you're trying and you're doing your best with what you have and who you are, right, and your experiences.
Well, and being more aware of it. I think when I started out writing these books, 10 years ago or whenever it was, let me think, the first one came out in 2007, but I wrote it in 2005. So it's 10 years ago. I think that, first of all, the discussion wasn't out there as much. And so that was part of why I wasn't as aware. And so, yes, I wrote things like, well, okay, here's, a role for the high priestess and the high priest, because my group only has a high priestess, feel free to just do it with one person. But I didn't stop to think that, maybe some groups have somebody who doesn't call themselves that at all, there was a little bit of that. I said, you can, I always say, use this however it works best for you. That's sort of, there is no wrong way to use my books, whatever way works. But I am definitely more mindful of it, both in my life and in general. And I try and bring that to my writing now. because I want people to feel welcome in my books the same way they are in my life.
Awesome. Well, we are running out of time, and I know we could probably talk much more. But if people wanted to find your books and talk to you about things or have questions, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, I'm on Facebook, Deborah Blake. Very complicated. I've got all these like code names now. Deborah Blake on Facebook, Deborah Blake on Twitter. My website is DeborahBlakeAuthor.com. Again, with the tricky, really hard to find stuff. And I do have a blog that I blog quite a bit. And sometimes I blog about pagan things, and sometimes I blog about writing. And a lot of times I put up pictures of cute cats because I have 5 of them, and it's my blog. I can do it. And that is DeborahBlake.blogspot.com. And, if you go to my website, you can find the links to Facebook and the links to Twitter and all of that kind of stuff. And I try to be accessible. If somebody asks me a question, I will take the time to answer it. Sometimes my answer is no.
Right.
If you contact me on Facebook and ask me if I can write you a love spell, I'm going to say, I don't really advise that. Go look in my book that has the opening to love spell. That'll do ya. But yeah, people can definitely come find me all of those places. I am everywhere.
Awesome. Well, we will have all that in the show notes, so people can look on the website and click on the links. And thank you so much for being on the show.
And thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. I'd like to thank Deborah for joining us on this episode. As always, if you have comments, questions, or would like to read the show notes, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com. You can subscribe to the show via iTunes or the Stitcher app, or follow us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast. You can also financially support this podcast through PayPal or Patreon. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.